I'm Ted London, Senior Research Fellow at the William Davidson Institute and faculty member at the Ross School of Business. And I'm here with Rustam Sengupta, who is the chairman and founder of Boond. Rustam, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Ted.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the background of Boond. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of what got you interested in this enterprise and some of the early history?
Sure. The genesis of Boon was back in a business school as well. So I was going to INSEAD Business School in 2008, and that's where I had an opportunity to actually study from some of the wonderful professors as well, and that's where the Boon idea was seeded. But I obviously worked after that for a little bit, accumulated some capital, and in 2010, end of 2010, Boon started. We started as a small solar energy access company with solar lanterns and home systems. But since then, over the past 6.5 years, we've grown on to microgrids, mini-grids, rooftops, and a lot of other solar energy access.
So I know that Boon does a number of, if you will, verticals, some different activities. Can you walk us through each of those?
Sure. So Boon primarily, we are in solar energy access, but we look at solar energy in two kinds of rooftop interventions. One, which is sort of a direct, privately owned rooftop intervention, which would be in, let's say, a school, a college, a hospital, university, or even in a house, but directly owned by one single person. Now, this kind of a business is sort of, which is more of a trading and energy company, engineering company business, where we'd go assess the rooftop, we'd set up a power plant, and we'll, give power, and the revenues recognized instantly. In some cases, we'll partner with a bank to get the personal loan. On the second hand, the second vertical, which we really focus on, which works directly with the BOP, is where we set up micro and mini grids in villages, which are more like community rooftop plants, where you'll have one power plant, but multiple 40, 50, 60, 100 houses connected to that solar power plant. And here the innovation lies in the way the metering is done, in the way the business model, which is a prepaid payment plan-based business model, which takes place. And here it's more of an asset-based business, where we invest in a particular asset, set up a power plant, and run it over a period of time to recover back our revenues. So two different kinds of models, one which has a very long turnover ratio, so it's a slower turnover in case of the microgrid, but the IRR or the returns are pretty strong. Whereas in the other case, in a simple rooftop direct business, where it's more of a cash flow business with a quick turnaround ratio, but it has lower margins. So both sort of are complementary verticals to each other.
Something that you have talked about is sort of giving an enterprise that's focused on the base of the pyramid a longer runway to get started. Can you talk about how you've achieved that with Boond?
Yeah, so interestingly, what we realized earlier on is that the incubation period for a technology or a business model in the base of the pyramid domain is fairly long as compared to, let's say, in IT or e-commerce, where you could do an innovation and in 3 to 5 years get your money out or get the investment out and make the tangible impact. In the BOP domain, you need a longer runway, maybe 5, 7 years, or in some cases 10 years. So in that case, enterprises like ours have a choice to either raise capital, multiple rounds of capital, to stay alive and keep sticking patiently at the objective and the vision. Or what we decided is that we'll try to hit profitability fast, which basically means we scale up faster and we try to make our business model more profitable, and it comes at a slower growth rate, obviously, as compared to raising multiple rounds of capital, but it's more sustainable because then we have a choice of investors we make. We also have more cash flow turnaround, as well as we have profits which help us sustain over the bad periods of time. So we give ourselves, in the matter, the incubation period. So instead of going to capital infusion every 3 years or 5 years, we can sort of hold on and bootstrap ourselves for 5, 7 years. So we give the technology and the business model some time to sort of seed and grow in itself.
So when you talk about these two verticals, the rooftop model that really, if you will, serves more top of the pyramid customers, although not exclusively perhaps, and then the microgrid, which is really focused on low income base of the pyramid markets, how do they, in terms of revenues and financials, how do they begin to complement each other?
So I think in the rooftop, it's not really top of the pyramid. It's mostly indirectly supplementing the BOP. So if a school is set up, we'll electrify the schools. Obviously, the client for us is the school. But the school might be having or probably has more BOP clients because these are areas which are energy deficient. So the arbitrage is that they need energy. Maybe they're not models where they are individually. But what we find there is that there is a huge gap in the supply of energy, and in actually, the amount that is the demand there is. So we think that is a good model for us to follow as well. Also, that the country and the whole world is moving towards renewables in a bigger scale. So we find that the market, there is lower client acquisition cost in that kind of a market. So we stick around and do that. And this, it comprises of nearly 60 to 70% of our business, much more than the microgrids in terms of revenue. But in terms of actually activities, or in terms of intellectual capital, it's the second one which takes the front seat. So the intellectual capital, the activities that go in, the time consideration goes in more in the microgrid. And in the microgrid right now, it is maybe 25-30% of our revenue share of the business as a vertical. But it's still a much more long-term prospect, because the whole world in general, BOP specifically, and the whole world in general is moving towards distributed solar energy generation, which is more sustainable, which is lower carbon impact. And also for the BOP, you can try out different pricing models so that it's more affordable for them. So I think that is the one which is going to stay and grow in the long term, while we, sort of keep, you can say, surfing on the wave of the rooftop business as well. And they sort of internally cross-subsidize each other. But more interestingly, it also helps us bring up the technical expertise of the company as a whole by doing both. And it doesn't force us to raise different kinds of capital for different verticals.
So as you think about particularly the microgrid and what's happened with that, can you talk, I guess, now about the evolution of your business model and what it looks like today?
Absolutely. So initially, like I said, we started as a very product and technology company. And we would start off by designing certain lights and certain lanterns or certain home systems, trying to give technically better quality products at the base of the pyramid. What we soon realized along the way was that to ensure good quality goes in, so that there's less servicing cost, the product lasts up to its lifetime, we would not be able to keep it very cheap, and then the uptake of the market would be less. So the big model intervention we made is actually going through banks and partnering with banks to get end customer financing, something which is being done by Grameen in Bangladesh or by Selco in South India quite a bit. So we replicated or sort of customized their model for the northern Indian context. And we started doing a lot of bank financed home systems. Over the period of time, again, we realized that even with the bank financed home system, we were just scratching the top of the BOP, because the bank would not give loans to the really poor people, because the really poor people did not have any demonstrable collateralizable assets with themselves. So the banks would be hesitant. Also, the banks would be restricted by the geography that they covered. So a bank would give loans to somebody maybe 25, 40 miles away from them, but not more. But there's not that kind of financial access right now for the communities we work with. So that's when we came up with community grids, and we came up with, microgrids where people would pay on a monthly basis to get electricity. Also, but that also sort of ameliorated, and we found that over postpaid and prepaid worked better, because people would have the flexibility to pay the amount that they wanted to pay, and they would get 24/7 access to power, so they could draw power whenever they want. So in the past, 2-4 years, the innovation has really grown, and right now we have very smart meters, intelligent meters, which not just make the prepaid model, enable the prepaid model, but they also make smart decisions on the pricing of the electricity based on the demand and supply optimization. So if it's a bright sunny day and the battery is fully charged, instead of just it tries to incentivize the people by something like a reverse surge, so it reduces the price so that people use it more, so to get consumer surplus and producer surplus aligned. So it's becoming smarter, and now we are moving on to capturing the data and finding models to cross-subsidize the microgrid cost using some kind of a monetization of the data. So it's grown a fair bit, and it's always grown bottoms up. So as the demand and the feedback from the community has come in, we've started changing our technical model as well as our business model.
So as we think about the microgrid model, and if I were to come to a village,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to doing that.
Yeah,
come to a
you're
village.
more than welcome.
And would visit the microgrid. I would come to a village. What would I see in terms of the stakeholders and how they interact?
Yeah. So the first time you enter the village, you would probably first go to the central charging station, which is the solar panel array, the battery bank, and our electronic charging station apparatus, where people come and they charge. And there you would find the entrepreneur or the manager of the microgrid. He is typically the guy who owns the rooftop. He owns the roof on which we put our plant in. He has a lot of investments into, and a commitment into being the leader for energy in his community, and also ensuring our cash flow works well. He's the one who the people buy the energy payments from, and he's also the one who maintains the system and does the first level of servicing, and cleans the panels and does. It's a very important person. Then what you will see is from the central charging station, you will see radially lines going out, power lines, which are sometimes 96 volts, sometimes 120 volts, sometimes as per design. As these lines will go up, and they're anchored to the ground by very high quality 6 foot or 6 meters, 7 meters poles, and these wires will then go into different houses. Inside every house, you'll find these wires which are transmitting power at a very high DC voltage, actually going through a meter which steps it down to 12 volt DC, which you and I can use. And while it is stepping it down, it's also controlling how much power can be drawn. And the meter is, it's a meter which is allowing a prepaid system. So you'll see that, and in each of the houses, what you'll see them using a couple of lights, a fan, in some cases a TV, a mobile charger for sure, a small radio, an MP3 player. In some of the cases where they're a little more advanced, they might even switch on a computer. And they pay according to whatever they use, so they pay according to the units they buy. So you'll see the interaction between a lot of these community members, maybe 50, 60 of these households connected to the microgrid. They come to the microgrid owner, they pay their money, they get this little cash card which they charge, they go back home, they put it in the energy meter, and they get electricity. And so that will be your kind of experience, and at night it will be fabulous, and I'd really like you to be there, because you'll see it as like a little oasis of light in the 150, 200 households in the village. You'll suddenly find these 50, 60 households well lit up, as compared to the rest who will be burning kerosene lights, which are, you and I both know, very inefficient and dangerous.
That's something that you mentioned that we've also talked a bit about, is this idea of the data that you're collecting. You think about that as a way to perhaps generate a new revenue stream. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So we are very bullish on the amount of data we are collecting, because the smart meters aggregate the data and send it in a 10-minute interval to the server. And all the application is on the cloud. So what we really think is the microgrids have a long period, to break even and all that, which makes it hard to get debt for the microgrid, which is one of the challenges of the whole model, that we have to constantly get debt or some kind of capital to set up these microgrid assets. Now what we find is, if this data, which is data like how much the consumer is using, how much power does he use on a daily basis, what all devices does he use, which times of the year does he pay the most for power. So, during the October-November season, we found that typically people have a good buyout, and it's 2x the time that's the average. And that's because there's a festival season and all that in India. And so all this data, and also the supply data, is captured and is on our server. What we find is a lot of people might be interested in this data for finding out what the income profiles are of these households, and also finding out what appliances they use, but most importantly also finding out some kind of credit risk assessment of these communities. So how often have they been paying, how much have they been paying, their willingness to pay. So what we believe is, hopefully at some point we will be with proper privacy control and intellectual property control, be able to give analytics based on this data through companies which are interested to enter the BOP, for them to have a smaller time frame to hit the market than we did. So we share our knowledge with them, and if that can monetize the microgrids, it's also helped us scale up much faster.
Something you've also said when thinking about an enterprise, and whether we call it a social enterprise or a BOP enterprise or anything, you said profits are not bad.
Yeah.
So just talk a little bit more about that.
So when we started, this is a very strong challenge that you pick up. Electrification is something which has not been done well in South Asia. There's been good initiatives now lately to push it, but it's not been done well, and it's been done off coal mostly. So when you take up such a big challenge and you set up a business, what was really hindering us when people perceived it as a non-profit, they would perceive it as an institution which would constantly raise charity grants, which would perceive it as an institution which would not have a streamlined intellectual property or a process or optimized supply chain or model. So we tried to infuse that kind of a culture, that even though we are working in a domain which is predominantly development sector oriented, we still have to work with the way that our objective should be to get sustainable. And you can only be sustainable if you're profitable first. Because if you have some kind of profits, if you have at least you keep that as your goal, then you actually end up making the company more leaner, and you try to get to the market faster because you're burning cash, and that hurts you. So we did it clearly as an objective, and we don't think profit is bad because we think it helps us to create an optimized lean structure. It helps us to innovate with a more sense of urgency, and it sort of makes it into feel like a career which you're chasing, a target which you're chasing, rather. And we know that there's a lot of good work which happens in non-profits as well, but we also sort of evaluated how the capital markets were flowing in terms of grants, and we did not want to be held to a particular grant mechanism or a fundamentality on which sector to do. We wanted to focus on electricity and energy, and for that we thought making a little profit so that we can constantly innovate based on our own acumen would be a good idea. So for us, profit is not bad. It's of course that we are not greedy and we are not profit centric, but it's important for us to keep that as an objective, as operational objective.
So as you look ahead, what does Boon look like in 5 years? What are the big changes that you're striving for?
So I would say what I would want Boon to look at, because we've not seen the future. But I mean, one of the things that we want Boon to significantly be perceived as is a company which has innovated or at the BOP energy space. Because the BOP energy space is unique. We have an advantage of starting from a scratch, from people who are starting from zero connected electricity to people who will probably go on to products and services much faster than people have done before. So they'll probably buy their first cell phone in a month's time after getting electricity. They'll buy a TV in 6 months' time. They buy a computer in a year's time. So what we see for ourselves is sort of that brand which is known for the innovations it's done in the BOP, and it's known for creating sustainable models which either we can scale or other people can replicate. Because there's a strong cultural sensitivity in our work we do. So we are also happy to transfer our technology, transfer our process methodologies to anybody else who wants to scale it. And we also want to be perceived as people who have sort of worked in the BOP and managed to not just create value, but also be able to create it in a very sustainable way. So that would be our hope and perception to do that in the next 5 years.
One of the things you've talked about is impact on the ground.
Mhm.
Certainly that's something you're driving towards, and part of that is, as you've talked about, is sort of giving the people to have access to power and to be able to do more things. But you've also talked about empowerment and
Absolutely.
shared some interesting stories, particularly about women. Could you do that? Could you kind of highlight a story or two that would sort of give us at least an anecdotal sense of that kind
Sure.
of impact?
Like I mentioned, energy is the cradle for development. I mean, you don't see electricity and energy tangibly in a lot of cases, but you see its applications manifesting in a lot of spaces. So we can see that what energy does for education very easily. A school is now, a lot of schools we have powered off solar powered projectors. So they were beaming classes, which are high quality classes, into a small rural school so that they get the same quality of education that a person in urban areas would get. And similarly, what we found, which was very interesting, is a lot of these primary healthcare centers or these small dispensaries, which would do a lot of prenatal and postnatal service care, would have a lot of challenge without electricity. Because if you don't have electricity, you don't have proper sanitization equipment. And without sanitization, one of the biggest problems of postnatal infections is it becomes a significant problem because you're not doing it properly. So what we found is a little energy intervention. It might not initially seem a lot, but suddenly enabled a big impact, a big healthcare impact on the ground, because now they developed a habit of sanitizing the equipment because the sanitizer was working. And once they sanitized it, there's a huge, we have not statistically yet evaluated it, but it's one of the studies we want to do. But they've really anecdotally we've seen that postnatal infections are going down. So this affects not just one issue; it affects women healthcare and everything. I've also heard, and Boond has not done it, but I've heard of some of my designers trying to design solar-powered sanitary napkin making machines. They haven't been successful yet, but these are the kind of interventions which we want to get over with. And our whole goal is how do we make a appliance more energy efficient by reducing the wattage consumption it has, and then how do we link it up with the solar DC powered model, so that we can create something which can just be parachuted down into a village and runs on its own, but its implications and impact is far greater than just providing energy.
Great. I know that part of the impact is also empowerment of women.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So what I can just talk about from our experience in 5-6 years ago when we used to go and we used to do training sessions with women, and we would sit with the women, we tried to talk to them. They would not talk back. I mean, they would not interact at the same level. They would have their face covered most of the time because I'm a unknown man coming from outside, and they would not be very interactive. And that obviously was hard because when you try to design a product or a service with them, you wouldn't get feedback. Over the period of time, the fact that they have electricity and they pay for it, not just the fact that they have it, but the fact that they pay for it somehow makes them feel a sense of ownership and a sense of accomplishment. So some of them do really well and become small entrepreneurs and develop livelihoods. But in general, the basic trend we've seen, and which is really something very satisfying, is when I go nowadays, the women they come out of their homes and they will ask you. Sometimes it's like really difficult questions like, why is my bulb not working? Why is this not happening? I paid this much. What is not happening? But most often, you'll see a huge increase in confidence of the way they speak to you. And while there are multiple factors that are attributed to that, but energy is one of them, because when you switch on the light at night, you do feel safer. And so that's just how I feel now in 5 years. But one of the direct feedbacks I got is women in India, a lot of times there's open defecation, so they don't have bathrooms. So they would walk up to the fields and they would do it before dark. And they would do it before dark because they don't want the men or passerbys to see them. And often enough, they would step on a scorpion or a snake or fall into a gutter or something like that. And with this little light and one of these mobile lights that we have, they actually, they tell us that, oh, now I can take a light and do it. So it's a lot of stuff that I hear the stories now, which we never thought, which we never designed for, but we find them tangibly affecting it. Also, the danger for kerosene lamps spilling over, and when a woman is at home, is the highest, is one of the biggest dangers. Again, another thing we didn't really design for, but nowadays I get the feedback that, oh, initially I used to be very scared that the kerosene oil will spill, and because my house is made of wood or some kind of combustible material, it'll catch fire. But now it doesn't. So these are little anecdotal feedback we get, which makes us feel happy and makes us feel that the community is more empowered.
Well, this has been great. Rustam, thanks for taking the time to talk. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ted.